Is cockach she? Is Sàr-Sgeòil bhriathran? Is an-diugh Sient na haperton écolach a chhlach go rialtas oillteil a chrúich George Orwell as de leabhar banamala agus a bhfuaghfar a scríomha. Seo bud fiction han a cha ban bullach is a bhac mena minne bhain I dhéadichi.
As yn yw'n liadach gael breder is wacht yn iw agus y pys yn sien. Ferach gyn cho diffriki fo rwts y biela, cho ŵr agus mac y bych tiachgarach gan y chwle gynylach agus liar garirw gyrysachal a mes mynd yn gybri cwnia haw galifach.
Hwge gael ffach, mae hwge gael canan, gys fi brian mi ein drwchilus, gys fi brian mi ein smachtigus. Agus harwysyn gwir y fôr ic na chydd leabhar ikke. Os nhw'r ha brin mi ein big brother, nhw'r ha brin mi ein thought crime, nhw'r ha brin mi ein Newspeak. Ha torsh gan y leabhar doi Cathy MacDonald.
He wasn't trying to predict the future, he was simply trying to tell us how it might look should certain circumstances occur. This is how it might turn out.
Hug Orwell súil an túil mo cuairstead is chaith gúth Sàr-Sgeòil. Glós sinach gus y leabhar banamala bheith díobh ann is scríbhig. Leabhar mo húil fo scail fórneast is ana-ceart. Úd, scialach mo oillteil is uavas. Agus seo far an danig ag a scríbhig. Seo achtarí Orwell ilan Jura, far an deach big brother I dhénig. Far an danig Sàr opad Orwell go bí, 1984. Rilín an arna coci an an baile lunain a bheit dorach is trúag, bheit Eric Blair sin an hen bestí ag Seòras Orwell is smúneach im an naimrí teach, agus a cliscich raia.
The future, at any rate the immediate future, is not with the sensible men. The future is with the fanatics.
Ach is scríbhig na mléireann sin san nágfias na céad díag is daichiad, san na bhaid anú tealaf de gáte fascaig sa mig bethe híalaige is fos as an scríbhig.
June 20th, 1940. Thinking always of my island in the Hebrides, which I suppose I shall never possess or see.
San syniarannod na lor lá ha Orwell a tor de chiad immerag in jalaf a veici te gaatje konis na hilanen in ier. Ach nu de skriva shid, skenich nach roan ga ach ashling vjaulte. Da lam is de chud Orwell fakel het pepet mun a vian a veici falach na hilanen, hugum prieve de Winston Churchill ravik an Parliament. Nam feig Hitler lan van ooggud hurta vigin suil keiltje. Valléin uur en norochet is je kur kartrua lian science heen. Channe du gora Churchill het gar gewoonte se de jaren wat channig die chin kubi. A chacharach Orwell al lumen.
I remember during the war, near the end of the war, going out to one of our weekly lunches when he said to me how much he hated London and how much he'd like to get out of it. But he said, of course, you can't get out. You can't leave when people are being bombed to bits all around you. He didn't say this in the least heroically.
Vallonnen roppig dorach a bdistile bommichen, van mi agus an honnig gaun, chudig a chule kaalka sint die duhich na Sgeòilude ag Orwell. Ga je raak er aan film zie je, bdia en alumage, ach an dat die idu sé vaun nach balle de sin chudig Orwell cool as a vat, het er de vaak oglish. Ga Orwell a hapit in een fascistich an een hokkig cahar in Spáin. Maar zijn vallan is ik gun minnig je wat kokkig het harin kounsig in a chos, jedig maar a hachad is Spáin. An de jaren skrif a 3 meesen mis de hoosich in arne kokkig, haket ne bedieren show an een bielene karakter.
It isn't the war that matters, it's the after-war. The world we're going down into, the kind of hate world, slogan world. The coloured shirts, the barbed wire, the rubber truncheons, the secret cells where the electric light burns night and day, and the detectives watching you while you sleep, and the processions and the posters with enormous faces, and the crowds of 1 million people all cheering for the leader till they deafen themselves into thinking that they really worship him.
Hanna Orwell go Jura I sgrífig leor a go bhína rafag, go ngág sirig na súilge chud é dhéireg agus I chiont a go deachgarach.
Gaharithe trofethe, Iwsithe rútain agus gaharithe injing, agus sannar a chaig an Spáin a hanig sóisialachas go bhí mar bhunchritú na bheitthe, agus bha maréis bin ar hóisi an darna cogach bha go múra dóchas go go bhí na rút ma go sóisialachas dul a híine bar, a cúideoch sanna sa Spáin chud é geolalas a me critse sanna hiadúir go dóin totality as a mer smachchas me sin na Gaelic héith agus ha bha feichgin cúnarste luib sin. Bha scríbh masrú an cogach fuair ann na a bha dúne an in America an Breting an differátin bha uiach go háast an na comanachas smungin gré system a bhaune gúdig maithe hianú ach bha Orwell a feichgin na gúnarstan. Sa me critcin de scríbh leor mar rauach gan ich an in níir gefúteach rút in a golca má dorcha go má lua.
A gaim a hoci bha Orwell a gwbydd gan BBC o ruchgach ych frogram yn propaganda, hwrt a hyn daflion y cawl ma haim, ach ryn a ffeim gaag ta, nwyd a chrwycha ministrolach na ffyddin. Gyda fan hogach siachad charw sŵl persant ag Orwell ach dorcha. Gaddi just jega hyn se fen ailin balach bec o'ch gwachachig chych a lisio.
Bha Eileen na bhain, bha ishe, bha ith basach a rilínio per lanse, bha rút an uasach a tachart na bheithen al banje, bha gíle begach ga edúch gwachach Richard, agus ha me critch bha Orwell is an Richard chum al cána, is get nach rú, bha tóra, bha carstoch, is smundin gyrdoch nach behoiga, ach bha son Richard chum al cális, bha son teiche a lúnin, ha me smundin gan tig dunniir sa biach in Corsona vitu son teiche a lúnin as na blianich sin.
Agus a falla fel lúnin con the Orwell va vachgog Richard.
What kind of father was he?
Well, he was actually an extremely good father. He was very loving, very hands-on, which was quite unusual for somebody who was brought up in that period of time, because fathers, generally speaking, didn't get involved with their children. But he was quite capable of feeding me, bathing me, changing me, and doing all the things that mothers had to do.
Noedd a chaith daf om atomach a lygaledd Japan as a lúnastil na ciad diag daihid a cóig lig sin réis an ar-a-mach nucleasich ma Sgeòil, chonig Orwell manig dorcha gan naimri teach.
Bhair sin habis mynd den bheach gymbi cogach nucleus o chawn gwire, gyn change barach bomach yn iliacrel. Agus hamis mynd Cyrsion mach bíag an beach sin ag finnes an bíag a scríbh déirg na ceirtain ag tuairt na cóigatan leis go rón cúach sin ann. Ach fa cúteoch agus sé seo ingan nuirtain is eintin mnior fecin nar ham bom ann chanéimid a bhí gachhachgach agus ha bhíú gachhachgach ach leis go bhfuil an bom an srúid smach go chamal an dúich ac a tain agus an tlói ac a tain.
Hannig 1984 gobi as een jaal sanach ge krieg hockey uwyd, gen jalu cogach nucleusach sgydis gan da hw. Haljaur het janu jalaf de hul e de villig le cogach voor smach kries staatjent moore oelig wachtig. Hab dechting van den amuur, reun, vleine huun, na vaarste Oceania. Doeig le jachger gestuurd en ametje maar Big Brother. Ha ministralch gegeul het jelige die cogach agus keurig. Ha ministralch gefartjes is sparach paartige krooi. San a ministralch na feeding ha propaganda strúig. Agus as an danig Newspeak, canan chol loom agus na choring an a looklavert few smönige get cheswe na ine staatje.
A Winston Smith na vaul gan a farti politicich ekki de vianach a gopet gan ministralch na feeding, a griach a gaskrive gachteri. Ha gaharach ag siawn irisin gan y fepad nech Times gus y ffrycarat fialsanach gyfarti. Ha apert y gyfarti.
Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past.
Cléiste chud is móga le héit ha Winston a lás a gynche fahúl in telescreen. Inal television ha chan bhain crúil ag stú propaganda a cha camal súl hiar a chula dunyacha agus ha polis na smáin a genú céineach go miadúil.
Ha Winston a brúad a tjónta gan naine stáit, get a lán is ekki gefúdu chud an gdéim son smáin chiont. Ha skrifig leor lá, rúta ha tedamistje.
Down with Big Brother, down with Big Brother, down with Big Brother, down with Big Brother, down with Big Brother.
Ha the hydamasg fiw smynach me yin tjóntag a neu na stáitje. Agus ha Winston can viach ma ha fuasgóg eithith go bhíanna agus dóchas go bhfuil sin anúra de sinnéin is trúige agus is ísle. Na tuine boch, na tuine anilach nach dúad fölum, nach rú kettiche gaibh agus an party gan camal fantal.
As J. Blianach yn leidji Aracich, fa Orwell bwyltach o chwle grym o bernach yoga a goan. Ach faes ag I cwtioch grosyn y tachgyg ych horym y nofel fan a llawn ysgrifig.
It was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13.
Iem ag a ffen y mach a lwnin. As J. Cwrs gadig go Jura an yna ciad diag da eich sa coig, chwyr Orwell re gyn hilig an aflonne, sgyffeg a tair fal, far y mwrin ga ysgrifig.
My wife and I felt rather sort of protective towards him because I somehow felt that after his wife Eileen's death, his life in London, where he was busily saying yes to all journalist commissions and writing, it somehow wasn't viable. I could see why he sort of walked out on it and went all the way to Jura.
I'm a critical culture of Gaelic culture. Greaaticar derive vegain de goed kan ik ro genius gaan ach daonnan live han helen an an Gael had bria han jelen gige go fiich se nach nach ro eloch naatjes munging agus ha me critical mar schengen de huga aatje far rois in a misk begelange in a bear. Har wa fasker dochter, har wa fasker hospital. Ach daonnan life va hole dan va frioch kan aatjen en immeloch ek naum sam schon je me gat delige Islande na doi heen. Agus am krit grois ek heen je de go prige ga agus go jera go prige ga hu vi skrive geloor skrive lorientach ein.
Femi gromion in Nederland gelaatjeth gehalig. Gjons fatte wehe, va kranje va shed wie Orwell het meintje na halappe. Ve ga koal Scotchman orde, san je Scotsman, maar skriva heen go carriage.
I find this a good, easy way of annoying them.
Hamis minnig het gero droch fiach ik me een alpe, alpe nicht. Scaret en hunnik in er van school als een notion aan zijn remans volgens halmene Burma. As a school ga ik school preparatory maar even daar. Sint Cyprian's misjacha ga eten. Agus she system. Maar hele voor 1984 brutal afashen. Van nog research en semi ik een banig ook ietsje. Agus she ben kanners na school flip van skurriges en zo gewoon. Agus van uimoor ekkesje aan een gachrut konhieltje alpe. Agus van we cheannsalachd vi sapasje schon na Scots Greys, agus vi basige schon na Scots Greys ingenult na Sharburn with Gianna. Agus ga Eric Blair og mar va ka naim va eschen kio ikke inorsion ether alpe. Agus na stereotype show agus vi go chaun go dur go drif se burn with the vi behe gun sporshitcher behe gun tolches.
Va Orwell cwtioch gecanig a lampanich ich ons groaatjach o moorachge a rui einpedig kwechting.
Cysonnig ar chianam?
Wel, sé anam gyma alpanach a hynny'n Eric Blair, agus yn tydd Blair yn siolach ac fa cílan ac i trafloch, fa eiroch ac yn Jamaica, agus sy'r gras toch y gro Orwell y gyr I ffain ar ffala fo'n neachtri sy'n. Ach cydwch fa dolfo alap gw sasin gwyr y fôr. Han hau anam nes sasin ich yn na Seòras, nef Seòras, agus Orwell, se afin a hawn an assassin, agus gyfele nŵr sy'n cochial se le crwth na tîre an assassin. Ach fa cwtio'r cydrwmach leis gyda ddoes menig eich mi ein assassin a hawn. Yn afin Orwell, sawn leis mwyntir Ipswich a han afin, agus han mawn leis y ri, agus ha sio gyma as yn afisht an sy'n dwywych sy'n, gydawn leis y fwyntir hein, a hac yn afin sy'n. Agus leis sy'n de clach gan anam sy'n an yn doi ag rawel han strw sio y ri, tro'n dwywych, tro'n plwai, agus ha mysio gamecyn hin mae'r ffarsio sy'n.
Ha fyr gyrwa na oillteil, nach rwmwr yn ege ma alapa, agus alapa nich. Fa had yr algan da hyge Orwell mar inyam sech Eric Blair, gas gyrwa ffarach yn grw Blair tyliwch agus alapanach. As fa fala leiti yish blianach nes Jerry live yish gan y BBC nach rwa idir deal yr alapanich, nyr fa mwy an y Bengalis an y Burma, fa iolwch yr alapanich nach rw idir y costlish. Gwrad y gol cws wsgbe agus cam y cyd gyda I car cwrs y fwynda. Agus ha mar sy'n stodi an gydech a tarsing y rad sech y bu primi Edwin Muir barst. Sa'n ysym ddysgwrs dynnu fan yn Edwin Muir. Ach fa cwdiach gwyega an yn cananan.
Of course, he died very young, and I would like to think that had he lived for another 10, 15, 20 years, that a lot of the things that he thought about, he might have changed his mind about. Because there's no doubt that he did. He was quite happy to write and say, you know, this is what I thought. In fact, I think I was wrong, and change it.
Hannig Orwell yn hosiach go Jura is dúleg I Barn Hill ein fal van Tjolach Fletcher. Be Carden was yn Tjolach ga daiviaster, be sy'n fer jesach I feper nech yn observer, dyn I biastach ach urdach na fiachgen. Si eisiau ni hwrth I Orwell gyme Barn Hill yn Jura aatje as y feg a ffos son y liorig ysgrifig.
He arrived in April '47. And I remember very vividly him coming in and how ill and terribly ill he looked, and terribly drawn and sad face he had.
Fa befaint I Jura is na blianach as tí choci gymanabad dylwyn a an-diugh.
Well, much harder, because there was no telephone nearer than Craig House, which is 27 miles. There was, petrol was rationed, rationing was on. Only shop was down Craig House, and our really only communication was by the post van, which came 3 times a week.
Ach san y fa corda di Orwell gyda'n taatach o ewnrynach, gwyntach a Barn Hill a gwael mal, ys chai agwydach an yr nafias.
It's an extremely unget-atable place, but it's a nice house and I think I can make it quite comfortable with a little trouble. And then I shall have a nice place to retire to occasionally at almost no rent. My little boy is now nearly 2 and extremely active, which is one of the reasons why I am anxious to get out of London for the summer. Barn Hill, Isle of Jura. I'm just settling in here, up to my eyes getting the house straight, but it's a lovely house. I'm having to make do with a motorbike, which is hell on these roads. Come and stay sometime. It's not such an impossible journey, about 48 hours from London, and there's plenty of room in this house, though of course conditions are rough.
Get nach rond jalan niet yn tui, chabata mystanig pure Orwell Eric Blair yn was a gydwch condish.
Living here must have been the most difficult operation, I should think.
Well, you have to be self-reliant and able to do things yourself, because, of course, you never forget a tradesman apt to do anything if you broke a window or the pipe burst.
And I suppose any question of getting a doctor would have been tried out of the question.
Well, there was a doctor on the island, but of course right down at the other end, you know, and nobody was very keen to come up because the road was so bad.
Do you think that he felt that he was writing against time, as it were?
I don't think so, because I don't think that he was the sort of person who ever thought he was going to die. Not immediately, anyway.
Although he knew he was ill, of course.
He knew he was ill, but I don't think he ever entertained what is commonly known as the death wish.
Which was George's room, actually?
Well, when he was ill, which of course was quite often, he worked in the extreme left-hand top room. You can see the window from here.
On bheith fiúr Avril cóndais bheith chum scríbí ag Orwell, agus chum Richard a hort go Barn Hill.
I joined my father on Jura in 1946, about July, I think it was July time, 1946. He had just moved up and he had settled into Barn Hill, and then he came back to London to pick me up, and he took me up to Barn Hill, and that's where I settled in. So I was only about 2.5 years old when I went there.
What are your memories, your very early memories of being there?
It's a sort of an amalgam of all sorts of images, but I think really it's probably just the house, the garden, which of course he was trying to establish, and just being allowed to wander around at will. There was nothing to stop you from walking out and going where you wanted to. It was a very wonderful time. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Nu de ligge go láinte leis agus nach roi scríbeh, go talí Orwell a bhí mwy, uadlan a cúteach na nábíon.
We have been helping the crofter, who is our only neighbour, with his hay and corn, at least when rain hasn't made it impossible to work. The crofters have to work very hard, but in many ways they are better off and more independent than a town labourer, and they would be quite comfortable if they could get a bit of help in the way of machinery, electrical power and roads, and could get the landlords off their backs. In the 18th century, the population here was 10,000. Now, less than 300.
We were very isolated, of course, up in Barn Hill. There were people up in Chumhachd, which was a mile further up the road, and we would see them. I suppose from time to time we used to get milk and cheese from them, from the Darrachs who lived there. But otherwise, we were pretty much on our own.
Ha-mach oil Darrach don bhúin háas da fudach an Jura. Ha céine gedacha the brín when a hamlin of Orwell at the Nilan.
The main story my father particularly used to tell was when Orwell came at first, his first few days or weeks or whatever it was, when he used to walk up to collect the milk, and initially he would just come in and sit down in the kitchen and not speak, and they thought he was a bit droll because he was like that. But it was only after a period of time that they learned that it was because of his illness, because he had a problem, because of his lack of breath, he had a problem speaking after walking from Barn Hill up to Cumhachd, because the end climb to Cumhachd is actually quite a steep climb. So if you're short of breath, he probably found it quite difficult, yeah. But once they'd get over the initial bit of understanding why he had problems speaking when he came to the house, they actually quite liked him. They said he was always just a polite man.
Va parantan yn hwyhan ich Blair Sàr-Sgeòil na nábíon is an charichin ag Orwell sa fiúr Avril. Besaid da Paulin i van nahat Blair, hua da cosnag an Jura as jay hockey. Be Orwell a nábí beske ora.
Well, of course, he was known as Mr. Blair there, you know, Eric Blair, and they became friends, neighbours and friends with them, my mum and dad. You know, so. And Eric Blair's sister was there, Avril Blair, and mum and Avril became good friends. You know. They did have several things in common. You know, two women townies stuck really in the middle of nowhere, you know, virtually the back of beyond. Then, you know, so you can understand why they would become friends.
They named you after him, so I'm going to get you to tell me that.
Well, that's they liked the name Blair, and Blair's not a family name, so they never admitted to me that I was named after Mr. Blair, Eric Blair, but I think it's a very good chance I was.
A céine an prísealaigh Blair Rosga gan charda sa bhad ar a Faranton agus Orwell sa fiúr.
So tell me about this chair.
Well, this is one of a set of 4 that George Orwell gave to my mum and dad when he left Jura, and they've been in the family ever since. So that's 70 years they've been in the family. And when my mum and dad passed away, we shared them out amongst the family, so I got one each. Mum in particular liked the chairs, and that's why they've stayed in the family and will definitely stay in the family.
An-diugh had se Michael a dáchiad neachar an Jura, le Gaelic ag stocha fiche diú. Ach nuair a cha Orwell go barnhill an hoiseach an ana-ceart diag dáchiad sa sia, ver einig a chud bevóg an a hilanich Gaelic. An tlua chauntas an ana-ceart diag lechid sa hún, a seantin gro Gaelic ag chafór sianar as gach dichnar. Hu gaharach ag mór ad Orwell a bhí fudach a mescwaintse da náte, dúine le Gaelic, a ha callach gro gráin a bheith geré ed alapanich ed siarakach.
In this country, I don't think it is enough realised, I myself had no idea of it until a few years ago, that Scotland has a case against England. In the past, certainly, we have plundered Scotland shamefully. In some areas, at any rate, Scotland is almost an occupied country. You have an English or anglicised upper class, and a Scottish working class which speaks with a markedly different accent, or even, part of the time, in a different language.
Agus pe Gaelic, bha Or Orwell go na dúine as na cairneachgan far a ráir a brí na Gaelic is siar as mí hollite nach ráircha kickas gas na scoiltin.
Na me creid grúieke an a culturs an a ganan, agus hánig gaharíe, maar na roa rief duchenugí na Gaelic, gaharíe aging, skrive an a daigit sech as a chollevek, skrive. At one time, I would have said that it is absurd to keep alive an archaic language like Gaelic, spoken by only a few 100,000 people. Now I am not so sure. To begin with, if people feel that they have a special culture which ought to be preserved and that the language is part of it, difficulties should not be put in their way when they want their children to learn it properly. Secondly, it is probable that the effort of being bilingual is a valuable education in itself. The Scottish Gaelic-speaking peasants speak beautiful English, partly, I think, because English is an almost foreign language which they sometimes do not use for days together. Mar sin gáil sé car blá agus hóisia maris yen viach gan bachor baroch Gaelic via the BBC agus a siúla bech gan bachor diffúsaláidú gan bachor baroch Gaelic via the BBC.
Hug Jura agus na hilanich iad Orwell biach go gas úr iad a bhara le bheice iad a Gaelic agus a ralappe.
Fa gydu yn ei náisiantas sy'n bí. Agus fa sin filosof an rúd an húirte mi géin náisiantas na halape agus go sin chafór colach rí mar a bhain na násí as a cheannsalachd. Ach a gynna naim, fa gydu yn ei imperach. Agus leis sin cúteach a gaiteach go bhfuil an na neachtaí, chai rúd an donna dhéanú. An an halape fa chai dúthe i chrachach le bretin. Agus leis sin fa tic sin hamis ménicha náisiantas na halape. Gint nach rua ítir I gyntach a ghrys, fa fecin wel ha yfrán ar hon. Agus a féimeach yn y fi y cétar sin. Stoch nach bí sin y tor spéisia ac a gaiteach gyflawn agus ha yfran gael iawn.
Chalig I go láinte leis carúprach I enw mwy, a chaim Orwell I ddisgrifig trang leis y nofel. Ag ministrlach na fídein ha Winston a tacharta Julia agus O'Brien, ha céindeach galíise a fadagéid. Agus son O'Brien, of a Gaelic críomhartaí, san a Winston an afras gel esin a savuion hanai a fartaí, le bhriathran návid Big Brother Emmanuel Goldstein an caun. How beláige le stad son an dávan eit grain, ga chealt an gefír as a film television show rennig an scial. Úr is urdach get va cúteis nach de chóta, nuad va dúine tocal fianis for student na stáit, bhóich Winston gynt a gaharch im party an am návid, fo Eurasia go East Asia. Va 7 million neach a cwad Orwell me propaganda státe as a program show.
Habrin to rabbit gyda's du grama yin connard snachgachis totalitarianism. Dyn biach gan y fegi hyn?
Wel fa hyn y thors tai cri socialist, agus fa yn ffilfti fath a ddehe. Ach, Fo fi as y Span nyr fan coc y sif yn dod yn fa rec yn ddeudurach a chai car leis yn system common marc yn be. Agus faran rwy'n y Sovietich i fiach yn ricwr cyrsius na bwyn yn ille yn laf chli. Agus y mwstyn agus y cyrhydd an yn prisan. As fecyn wel fa rwyd yn carlis yn system fel giri coch hon hein. Agus ar ôl hir I coch ysgylch yn tlo hein ach dyr cymal an yn bwyn boc an yn party boc.
Had sin fullais gil grán bhaisig Julia ag Big Brother agus ar a farty. Han dí sé teonnta culiamanach a cynnych agus a farstas trúig gan a bhile.
Ha Winston cúteach go Sàr-Sgeòil Ed O'Brien a ha gateach a ga gomúne sin do bhuian a ha strí a neu a farty fan na brada. Hattor ga ies de lor le canart na baine a ha cymal amach gil yn party I gyori cocig a chymal bio a gynnu gronch son yn tlwg a chymal sies. Hanyl cael na chwnant gan y farty nio ga Big Brother mydd a hedig yn slwg na neu.
Ha fwr gwro ffecin yn cocig ffwr y fadol dol y chyn a bions na bog yn byn ac yn ysgroi yn yw'r chyn amach. As a ffecin wel nyr a ha yn neu fe chacad ag hanyl cormach fi bonach se dói fíormhais yn smachgach am yn tloi ac y tein. Smynnig na hachar an sy'n thas yn newsche leis na Sialach McCarthy. Agus y gyri y glawbel hasin I cyrsi ys y pors yn tloi ac yn Agus chaniet fwy yn rwys. Smynnig ffiws na hachar an yn bretin leis y riolta sy'n diach yn yrym yr y heiltocht. Ryd y syrwyd y ian yn yr glawbel ha naifich. Hoch cwnnwstoch ac yn ha ffeim ac yn sio I ianw, ha ffeim ac yn yr rhywun sy'n fi byc yn ys chynnu.
Ha be Orwell agus a fach go gan y barn hill hyn gwmwlatach go crych. My fi an a lwnystol na ciad diag daich hyd sy siach a Orwell o leib tupus di hyba fi basfor. Hafwnach dach a hen, y fach Richard y fa 3 blyn y gys, agos clown y feher Henry ys Lucy, y fach ag am yn chwrsrw yn rochlw yn Coddefddecan.
Coddefddecan is an extraordinary place, an extraordinarily dangerous stretch of water. It's swirling everywhere, and in the middle you have a standing wave caused by a pinnacle of rock that rises from the ocean floor. From, I think it's about 300 metres up to about 100 metres. And the water just hits this pinnacle, rushes upwards, and forms a standing wave. And that is the dangerous bit.
Ran into the whirlpool and were all nearly drowned.
My father misread the timetable, which was probably not difficult since he'd made it up himself. So it wasn't an official tide table, it was the one that he had worked out. Of course we arrived at Coedrechan and the tide was still running on the flood, and we got ourselves into all sorts of trouble. We lost the outboard. It got literally pulled off the stern of the little dinghy, little 10-foot, 11-foot dinghy. And at that point, of course, my father said to Henry, his nephew, who was, Henry would be about 19, I think, 19 or 20. Okay, Henry, you'll have to take the oars. So Henry grabbed the oars, started rowing furiously, and managed to get to a little island in the middle of Coedrechan called Elan Moor.
The awful thing was having Richard with us. However, he loved every moment of it except when we were in the water.
I was sitting on my father's knee and a pair of us disappeared under the stern of the boat, and we came out spluttering and came ashore. Now that sounds a bit silly, a bit funny, something to laugh at. But having an accident at sea can turn in an instant into a tragedy.
As J3 oedd yn hijedd tydd y ddylan môr as yn iachig Orwell oedd chenollasig, hwg dys iesgyddyn a elan lwyngiad, fad fforstyn ach gynharad esbio. Na mi gysgrifich ar y fi caeltiach a fe gwyn yw yr y nofel 1984, nach ro haast ach na llawn. Y ganyan bochgyn ga hir lentyn chdiach ni Orwell I chiad sgrifig ar y lawr, ach di siolantio. Gaddid ronoleg an yna cyrdiag daich at y siach, chai ac o Hospital Hairmyers fesgyd cilib ddijinier son sgrwyd ag X-ray agos o bwylieis.
Ward 3, Hairmyers Hospital, East Kilbride. Dear Tosco, thank you so much for your letter. I was conscious early this year of being seriously ill and thought I'd probably got TB. But like a fool, I decided not to go to a doctor's. I knew I'd be stuck in bed and I wanted to get on with the book I was writing. However, they seem pretty confident they can patch me up, so I might be able to get back to some serious work sometime in 1948.
Chab bwryncha gan mi miorach ag eith reis yn ar-a-mach nucleusich, charo a fechgyn rhae ach sŵl dorcha.
This stupid war is coming off in about 10 to 20 years, and this country will be blown off the map whatever else happens. The only hope is to have a home with a few animals in some place not worth a bomb.
Hwyd ych ar ei tosg o ffaifel am nymmer ag ysgrifau iddo fehe, gydoch ag o Orwell ag dditsin gyro ag chamal hyn ag ysymach safel diochog ag niwclysach le fi ffwydach an yn Jura. Fa Orwell am Hospital Here Myers is on i hiad siach miesent de neukiad diag daichid sa hoch.
This is a very nice hospital, and everyone is most kind to me, and I have a room to myself.
It was there that he was prescribed streptomycin, which had to be brought in from the States and had to be approved by the Home Office. And special permission was granted for streptomycin to be imported. But unfortunately, he was allergic to it. So he came out in most enormous blisters. His mouth swelled up and his fingernails fell out and his mouth stuck together, his lips stuck together with bleeding. And eventually they had to stop. So he'd only got halfway through the course of treatment. It did help a little bit, but it didn't cure the problem. I don't think it probably would have. I think his lungs were probably quite far advanced in their corruption.
I remember quite clearly he had quite extensive disease in both lungs, but it was principally his left lung that was affected. But it was very chronic, what we call fibrotic disease, not at all like the classical galloping consumption of the 19th century, which Brontes and the rest of them tended to suffer from. And therefore he was never terribly ill in the sense that he wasn't toxic or fevered or he didn't waste away to any great extent, but he must have felt pretty substandard most of the time. And of course he had a chronic cough, which wasn't helped by the fact that he smoked almost incessantly.
An anochgus a céhad a Winston Smith ag níisig a Julia gymi a gasing mw áte álan y mwyad yn dwy, se tíð y nád a hegid. As an hospital, sannet Jura I fa Orwell a brúter, agus ro iedig yn iwchyd hwyd a cet chilich a nilan, agus gópydd. Mar a hanofl o glwys dyr erd ha Orwell a dwynach ag farach gyn hytrym hlaie, fadda gyn sgwdd, egol gynnydd dyfra, gym ysganiddig. Lwach a chydorysyn ag efel y chwach, echtrig a hasgdifig, yn dafyn et y grain, polis yn smwain, yn biach gybyltje. Ha Winston as Julia gan hwring reim as jyd o telesgrin falletje vi kamal sŵl edd y raum smiad y cynnyrchig. Ha ffolysich gyfel O'Brien, y gwbydd ag polis yn smwain.
Looking back, with the benefit of hindsight, if you could ever have even imagined what he was writing at the time?
No sense at all of what he was doing. I mean, he wouldn't tell anybody else, people who would understand what he was writing. I mean, famously, he would, if somebody like Richard Rees would say, well, what's the essence of the book? And he would say enigmatically, well, what does 2 plus 2 make, Well, he said, 4 normally. He said, could be 5.
How many fingers am I holding up, Winston?
4.
And if the party says 5 and not 4, how many?
4.
Hyd Winston y hiwrach gys yn ffech ac e byti am party I gyr egin.
Ha O'Brien y mínach ag a Winston mar a ha doi really big brother y gwbydd.
One does not establish a dictatorship in order to safeguard a revolution. One makes the revolution in order to establish the dictatorship. The object of persecution is persecution. The object of torture is torture. The object of power is power. Now do you begin to understand me?
How Brian y gradi Winston, mae ha jalaf I years gan nawn pri chach, smynchith brog ys dawn bygyr dynnu, gwsiori bwyn.
Ha Winston ga hiwrig agos ga chamal gawn dy fieg, a sio ma siar y dol y lys tynnis eintion. A cha has dy joltug Julia Vra, has mynich y gnod sy'n gael afenwch gyr y party. Har het Winston go roim kiet sa hun, far mi pthys yn eich yn oed y siarwt o chwydys yn hicol ys nhw afas eich ore.
Ha barach gigilig Winston o rodain na rwt sa biele yn hwyl, agos nid had y mwy ceidio lan rodain acrach eich hiald I ydym, ha bra Julia is y fad.
Not me! Julia!
Nu er een film television gan George Orwell yn hosio, fa ffyngyn gan y chwlnica bail palmyd na misg yn nhw a fasach y glis cho brwydjol sa fa sio. Get be jala ffydd yn eich fawn gan ysgrif Orwell, ach fa ffeil fwr ydy lior. Chagog niach sa bi sgilel yn typewriter y halach o Jura, och ydy glam sgrifi Orwell sa lior crioch nitje pepedd. Chalig I gulantje lys yn nŵder I chomar catalagal. Ach rhan hyn yn opyd y cwyd 100,000 ffacol sa laeth pepedd. Gyda fi trial gwlwnain ys cwyd I genastag ar son y hwprach ach fa rhac cheinach gan cwyd criochedd am y llaw.
I am not pleased with the book, but I am not absolutely dissatisfied. I first thought of it in 1943. I think it is a good idea, but the execution would have been better if I had not written it under the influence of TB. I haven't definitely fixed on the title, but I am hesitating between 1984 and The Last Man in Europe.
Va Orwell fat of I rieristje le siljor. Is va crua jekolydd mynd y blionlich yn y va chien. Is va gwyl ar y fach gog yn jastig yn jekilsyn.
Richard is blooming. I shan't try and influence him, but if he grew up with the ambition of being a farmer, I should be pleased. Of course, that may be the only job left after the atom bombs. If the show does start, and is as bad as one fears, it would be fairly easy to be self-supporting on these islands, provided one wasn't looted.
Mas mynd yn gyda, yn y doi, gyda se lior dorcha a heim, se rawr a han, eith cwnnwrstan, mae'n hyll doi yn nadr ac yn eith beha afistioch a fi ac yn. Ha, se na rwda ha party gianw hat torch beha falaf o gwynir, hat torch gŵl falaf fwpa. Agus am y cryd bod y gwyd ra gyda dyn fan yn Orwell, y fa crydyn an y gŵl, ffos nyr y fa ffydd iedig y feha, ffos son y darna ŵyd, agus mae'r hwtw hw mae Richard Cornish, agus a cwynig Richard Bock am ysgo harw a hareg y rwata, a cwynig yma gŵloch i gydd.
Ach syr na mae gael ffen siachat ydy hynny sy'n mae gael hen agos Richard ydych dachi iawn yn Jura.
Fon ysgrif a hamis mynd gyro Jura y cord ar gwir y fôr agos gyro gyma tolich a gyma dyrf gyda tolich leis gyro eich o inslanch gyda o donna gynaim. Ach gymbiag Sion behegian on hyn. Far fi cwrsyn re Sion blian y confused na rafad then Eileen Bio. Fees na céftol a Jura. Agus nyr a fa awn fa spors gyor ac a fa syrfych leis a fi sgrif ac ond a se sy'n yr ydys cytr mi gael. Gysyn gymbi taich gawn ag zaach an a Sion mach ag Richard ac gymbi coram ag ysgrifich. As leis gyro Sion an Jura gyr Sion bi gael Sion bi'n fata.
Sy'n nöydych neu ciad diag daich sy'n nöyd fa Orwell cianach mi anach leis a chehu. Beter ga Jura jagal agus ha aku dachieirijin an de skide Gloucester. Hoe jan dochter ek idish gefeemiga Jura illegale sich jaun. Ga hilliga gebraach gonna hillanen.
Do you remember what was your last journey or his last journey leaving Jura, although he wouldn't of course know it at the time?
In January 1949, he made what was to be his last journey. And I went with him, obviously, in the back of the car, and off we went, and of course the inevitable happened. The car went off the road. His sister Avril and my aunt and her husband-to-be Bill Dunn had to walk back to Barnhill, get another vehicle to come and pull us out. These sort of things happened all the time. It was just, it was almost an everyday occurrence. So he and I my father and I sat in the back of the car, and he just sort of told me little stories. What they were, I have no idea, but we just chatted to keep me amused, to while away the time.
Blianach yn George Orwell Jura Jacal, wat duine le heitje ahad gwn join darach nach canig fachgult mynolde se vacydd.
In later years, he never liked talking about Orwell, because he always felt the people that used to come and ask about him probably didn't respect Orwell when they wrote about him afterwards. My father was always very suspicious of reporters, we would call them nowadays. I think probably it's kind of an island thing, or certainly a Jura thing. You don't speak about people who've come to outsiders, so to speak. You know, people come and they are whoever they are, and you accept that, but you don't kind of comment on it.
As yn dach i edrych fa Orwell castach y gychiad chlofwol gan lior.
I ballsed it up rather, partly owing to being so ill when I was writing. But I think some of the ideas in it might interest you. We haven't fixed the title, but I think it will be called 1984.
Did you appreciate how ill he was at the time?
No, I don't think so. Because even much later, when I went down to Gloucestershire, when he finally moved down to a place called Cranham Sanatorium, I would go in and see him, and I'd say, well, where does it hurt, Daddy? Where does it hurt? Because there was nothing to show. So I couldn't understand. You know, to me, hurt was something physical. But of course, with him, it was internal.
Charwys ag Orwell di chaniga nw ddar anig a taiedig yn Cranham. Va brac ef iolich rwy lomach hasanach va clwyntyn, jydach y cwdw afasid. Chod tŵr at yr hialich van y Gaelic, van y fiol le blas na Gaelic, ag myntydd Jurau.
What voices? A sort of overfedness, a fatuous self-confidence, a constant bar-buying of laughter about nothing. Above all, a sort of heaviness and richness combined with a fundamental ill will. People who one instinctively feels, without even being able to see them, are the enemies of anything intelligent or sensitive or beautiful. No wonder everyone hates us so.
Coch ddetiga, fer a chaich gwsgolichtyn agus y fyg gyda scotch, dim mwyntydd na halapa diadach son casach ydore. Inisio biarlis blas cain chroestiad yn hiwrau, niolwch gwprach orsbydol Heir Myers, siach biolde lomach fwyntydd y gwy chyn.
Sy'n og fies neukiad diag daichyd sy'n neu, chai 1984 eilsach gan yn byddechtyn agus na stasiwn. Chabata gwsar o dwynig a folwg, gyda fa mwran gan y fiach gro a trawm grwamach.
What George said to me was that if people want 1984, if they wanted 1984 to end in a different way, it means they've missed the point of the book, it seems to me, because it's the working out of an idea which must be ineluctable, it just must go on in that way.
It must end tragically.
Oh, it must end tragically, because otherwise the power wouldn't be complete. He did once say that had he felt a bit better, he would have written the end better, not changed the end.
Just rewritten it or written it in the first place better?
Rewritten it better.
Anna medde gaf a ffygyn can y pepper yn nech gyr tyfn ym hwblwch. Y fian di 1984 y chlachgyd mae'r propaganda yn ei y ffarti labrich. Wel, chai Orwell a sachysyn y gra, every line of serious work that I've written since 1936 has been written directly or indirectly against totalitarianism and for democratic socialism, as I understand it.
Sannadd cofynach gyfa granig ys chabawn y sosialwch democratach. Fais egi gronyn yng Nghofiad i'ch smachgol agos y gymus na sŵrsio, fag ddetsin gyrwator drochanem gan sosialwch democratach fat lwgach ddysyn. Chan ie ffasnach gyfa sy'n nofel a chravig, na ligles y sio tachart, a sien y croch o gorstein.
Lorog Orwell aatje an y Jura far yn bwrin cas gdifeg, agos jaraf rhenia gachiam, fadjan y pican o bytherin, chwyd ac rifenwyl agos pdes a selia hedd sir as o'n ddwrsyn. Faedd y goich glan o'r fa corymig i falwch bec ag i Richard Rhi Chemichel le sŵrse. Jaraf san fa mielnach ag chamar fal fat bliana. Seil ma hanam ag lies fiawn son yn tynnu se fydd, dyn op yr unifalta eile y fe gaedd y chrwchig y sio an y Jura. Jaraf ha colwch gynnwyd addi carriage ga, seil y ffaw bas gadidw, ma ha eile na dy llawn.
I have a stunning idea for a very short novel which has been in my head for years, but I can't start anything until I am free from high temperatures, etc.
Fás Orwell yn arna ben Sonia Brownwell ach sé pásach tifna leachban na hospital van. Valáintje trúig svánis an na hospital Lunain. Be gan bhainthin as tí fásaí hanig a charid rénar heppenstal le hailde, who gas sin contas had a chóra gavachka as in Yiddish show. When I returned to London, Orwell was in a private room with his own telephone at University College Hospital. He apologised for this grandeur. The last opinion I heard him enunciate was that whereas formerly he had always derided attempts to preserve archaic languages like Welsh and Gaelic, he now thought such attempts worth supporting. Ha colloch gyda gahrach y fiach gyda gafi coni an Jura fer o Gaelic ag I fôr chwch. Chwchela yn nyn y fla ffichyd gan oillteil, na ciad siag agus I lechyd. Jydach gan hi lachin, mis ro'n dŵl o chwyd gotai eiritin as yn yelefys. Fa jydach daich sy sia. Hwgagddish Mr. Anig yn eich Barnhill.
The first time we knew, of course, was on BBC Radio, on the home service, 8 o'clock news. That was the first indication.
That must have been quite a shock for you.
Well, I suppose, yes, it was a shock in the sense that everybody was upset, and there was a lot of, toing and froing, and of course you pick that up, don't you? You sense that something terrible's happened, but you're not totally aware that, your father is dead, except that Dada is dead. But it doesn't really impinge upon you.
Do you think that if he'd been properly looked after or properly looked after himself, his life might have been saved?
Well, I think when you say look after himself, I think that's a very cogent point, because he was in Haremar's Hospital, as you know, for about 6 months, and they really did him an awful lot of good.
Did he have heroes, Orwell?
Well, I coming away from this occasion, this memorial service, I was giving a lift to his sister Avril, and I said exactly that. I said to her, who did he admire? And she said without any hesitation, oh, the working-class mother of 10. And I was expecting her to say Mr. X or Mr. Y or such a writer. And I asked her what did she mean by this. And what she really indicated was it was the way ordinary people get over extraordinary difficulties and keep sane and keep good-natured. And he really did admire this.
Van spéis ag Winston gan look obrach betrúi na hafel gan a spéis ve Orwell heen de voddenlich gun ruin ach am jolat je chosne. Hier shen ga jalavach a kuchievi as a filmshow gan a leor.
She is beautiful.
Nu, the Winston of this show on the room, Kiat Sahun, has Gaelic my school. Agus ha tosh chugatol ith café, as the villa fein shenevere sur the old. Ula ha kunja chugashent the Julia, agus ha shigin shiga, no the vaska curig, good the vra ish eshin. Ha foolish chinish, nachal greem farachkin, erakalakaga chele tulig.
An sa café ha Winston a cleintjent mar glé Oceania an lanvanuachgur haar fiachken Eurasia. Sio mar Orwell ga goed.
2 gin-scented tears trickled down the sides of his nose. But it was all right. Everything was all right. The struggle was finished. He had won the victory over himself. He loved Big Brother.
So suddenly, my victory. Love, love, love. I love Big Brother.
A filmchen gan Eric Orwell is screen voor in your television, a cthiochnachig leis an shalog laum show.
A chan leor a cthiochnachig leis shen. Ha ja radish the principles of Newspeak. She parst gan leor a haun ach mashir the skrivig blianlichen mode as J. Law Winston Smith.
Well, hanjele kriochnachig. Ik wien, gyda fa ffeilsgan ans na stadion yn eisiau, y gyr i'n captron sy'n dyrch y garich. harwydd y tic sy'n cwsiona fa awn. Ach, as y capel sy'n ag sy'n appendix, ag sy'n stael gyda'r edrych iawn hawn, ag sy'n caran chyryn, ag sy'n caran academic och. Ach a brin mi yn canan sio, Newspeak. Ach y clochgach yn canin ac yn pure the law fawn, Allspeak. Ach a brin mi yn sy'n trachatse, ag sy'n sialt yn gyfel, wel, hamtyl ach ar y rhys. Syrwn gyda fi brin mi yn Newspeak, syrwn gyda fi'n mi Oceania, syrwn gyda fi brin mi yn system sio ar ffat, mae rwyd ha as yn an-diugh. Hanyl y has dy lentyn. Achos asyn y tos wy'n bach yn dochys. Dirach bach yn dochys, mae chesyn dirach jerig yn sgiol gyfel y hwylyd yn y gofi ffosmach fat yn hwnnw gymbi syrs an y rhys ac leifach dy gochys.
Heg ma, ffosgwyd ti dydig y lor, ach sŵl ym eisiau gyfer yn y prols ar eddi, agos mi gyda gyfelad yr cwrasian yn nystym a fag an gwmar si as choffate. Ach, Sàr-Sgeòil Orwell na awner dian o sy'n Handmaid's Tale cwdioch clech cwda big a godag mag wyt begynnes ha caran sieraf hawig colafors sy'n y coet y ddasir Gilead agos Sàr-Sgeòil na scholar yn y colafors sy'n lat bwloch cynjoch rwa bwloch ffyr na fedd y chwarig yn y teipillen as na Handmaid's Tale. Agus mar sy'n a mis mwynjing gyda rwta hawn a torch rowch ach ara nach lig sy'n yn les cwsta hegel y fiorn ma sé agus gysis sy'n yn negisio.
We still have the same problem. You've got governments who want to control the population. And it matters very little whether it's left or right. For you and me, the people in the middle, it doesn't matter where the subjugation comes from, whether it's left or right, it's still subjugation. And that will continue forever, which is why 1984 will probably continue forever.
Hanyl môr yn sgrifyd yn dŵl far y fersiwn y clechgych yn enym mae'r goi coed yn dŵl Kafka escam y crytyn agos Orwellian agos hwca gwyn enym mae'r goi brynydd doi'n as y ffwyd y sŵl y gol cer.
Han rafik as yn yor hast ko cultur mochlainju sa va nyr Gaelic Orwell yn yor.
Si sgialach goroch y gorinach a chai George Orwell gorig I Jura ysgrifig a chan y fasnach gahan yn 1984 ach rafig mar y hwda hyn fiach nach tachada a sy'n yn croch o gorstein.